The moon is doing something impossible, and the evidence is floating right in front of it. A dead, silent rock with no air and no wind is wearing a glowing halo. That halo should not exist. If you want to hunt down space secrets that official press releases, skip right over, make sure you subscribe now. You will join a quiet group of people who would rather know the real story than the easy one. People have looked up at the moon for thousands of years. It is the brightest thing in our night sky. Ancient farmers used it to tell time, and sailors used it to find their way across dark oceans. But for a long time, the moon was just a mystery. People thought it was a perfect, smooth sphere glowing in the dark. They had no idea what it was made of or how it got there. In the 1600s, a man named Galileo Galilei pointed a new invention at the moon. That invention was a very simple telescope. What he saw changed history forever. The moon was not a perfect, smooth ball. It was covered in deep pits and tall mountains. The beautiful face of the moon was actually covered in violent scars. Over the next few hundred years, telescopes got much better. Astronomers watched the moon closely and drew detailed maps of its surface. They named the dark, flat areas seas, even though there was no water in them at all. Scientists expected the moon to be a very simple place. They thought it was just a giant piece of rock floating in empty space. They believed it had no weather, no sound, and no surprises left to find. But the moon was hiding secrets. As telescopes improved, people started seeing things that made no sense. Bright flashes of light would suddenly appear on the moon's surface for a few minutes and then vanish. These strange lights were called transient lunar phenomena. That is just a fancy way of saying temporary moon glows. They happened mostly in a place called the Sea of Crises, which is a large, dark spot you can see from Earth with your own eyes. Astronomers expected the moon to be completely dead and quiet. What they actually found was a moon that flickers and flashes like a dying light bulb. This gap matters, because a truly dead rock should not glow at all. Then came the space race. The United States and the Soviet Union both wanted to be the first to reach the moon. They poured billions of dollars into building giant rockets and sending machines into space. In 1969, humans finally walked on the moon. Astronauts brought back bags of rocks and dust. The world thought we finally had all the answers to our biggest questions. But the Apollo astronauts saw things that confused them. They noticed that the moon smelled like burnt gunpowder. The dust on their suits clung to everything and was almost impossible to clean off. Scientists expected moon dust to be smooth and round like sand at the beach. What they actually found was dust made of tiny, jagged, sharp pieces of glass. This gap matters because those sharp pieces can cut metal and hurt human lungs. The Apollo missions also left behind special mirrors on the moon. Scientists on Earth shine laser beams at these mirrors to measure the distance to the moon. They found that the moon is slowly moving away from us. The moon drifts away from Earth at a rate of about 3.8 centimeters every year. That is roughly the same length as a standard paperclip. It might sound tiny, but it adds up to huge distances over millions of years. Something even stranger was hiding in the data. It had nothing to do with the rocks or the dust. It was an invisible force that scientists had completely ignored. Get ready for the detail people remember most. This is the secret that changed how experts view our nearest neighbor in space. It was a massive, glowing ring floating in empty space above the moon. The next time you look up at the night sky, think about the fact that the moon has a ring like a planet. Did you have any idea that was possible? Or does this completely change how you picture the moon? Let us know your reaction in the comments, and subscribe to keep uncovering these hidden space facts with us. In 1998, NASA launched a spacecraft called the Lunar Prospector. Its job was to orbit the moon and study its surface from top to bottom. It carried special tools to measure tiny particles floating in space. These tools were designed to catch dust and gas. Scientists expected the Lunar Prospector to find almost nothing above the moon. Space is supposed to be empty, especially high up above a dead world. But when the spacecraft started collecting data, the numbers went crazy. The instruments were hit by a massive storm of tiny particles. There were millions of them floating in a perfect circle above the moon. Scientists expected to find total silence in the space above the moon. What they actually found was a thick, swirling cloud of debris. This gap matters, because a dead rock with no gravity should not be able to hold onto a cloud of dust like that. The data showed something even more impossible. This cloud of dust was not just floating around. It had arranged itself into a ring. The moon had a ring just like the planet Saturn. But Saturn is a giant ball of gas with massive gravity that easily traps rocks and ice. The moon is tiny and should not be able to hold onto anything. The distance of this ring was completely shocking. It started about 100 kilometers above the moon. That is roughly the distance you might drive on a highway in an hour. But the ring stretched out much further into space. It extended up to 60,000 kilometers away from the surface. That is almost 5 times the width of the entire Earth. If you could see this ring from Earth, it would look massive. It would make the moon look like a giant glowing eye staring down at us. but the dust in the ring was very thin and did not reflect sunlight the way Saturn rings do. This is the part of the story where the truth starts to slip out. NASA collected all of this amazing data from the Lunar Prospector. The scientists stared at the numbers and realized they had a huge problem on their hands. The ring should not exist. The math proved it. The gravity of the moon is too weak to hold onto these tiny dust particles, especially when the powerful gravity of the Earth is pulling on them. Every piece of dust in that ring should have been sucked away into deep space or pulled back down to the surface. There was no logical reason for the dust to gather into a perfect circle high above the moon. Scientists expected the data to show a clear and simple story. What they actually found was a cosmic impossibility that broke the rules of physics. This gap matters because it means there is a hidden force pushing the dust and keeping it in place. NASA decided to keep this data quiet for a long time. They did not announce it with big press conferences. They did not show it on the news like they did with the Apollo landings. Instead, they filed the information away in deep archives. Only a small group of scientists knew about the impossible ring. They spent years trying to come up with an answer before going public. The team came up with a few ideas to explain the mystery. The first idea was that the dust was coming from the moon itself. They thought maybe tiny meteors were hitting the surface and kicking up dust. When a tiny space rock hits the moon at high speed, it explodes. This explosion can throw dust high into the sky. But there is a big problem with this idea. Without wind or air to slow it down, dust thrown by a meteor should just fly away into space forever. It should not gather into a neat ring. The math proved that the dust would escape the moon gravity almost immediately. Scientists expected meteor impacts to explain the dust. What they actually found was that the impacts could not possibly create a ring. This gap matters because it proves the dust must be coming from somewhere else. The second idea was that the dust was coming from the sun. The sun does not just give off light and heat. It constantly shoots out a stream of tiny invisible particles called the solar wind. This solar wind blows through the whole solar system. It hits the moon every single day. Scientists thought maybe this wind was carrying dust that got trapped by the moon. But the solar wind is far too weak to carry heavy dust particles. And if it did drop dust on the moon, the dust would just fall straight down to the ground. It would not float in a ring for years and years. Scientists expected the sun to be the source of the mystery. What they actually found was that the sun cannot carry that much material. This gap matters because it means the dust is not falling down from above, but coming from somewhere much closer. Then NASA had to look at a very strange source. The moon has a very weak and invisible bubble around it. Scientists call this an exosphere, which is just a super thin layer of gas that barely exists at all. Because it is so thin, an exosphere should not be able to hold anything up. But the data showed that the dust ring was thickest right where this thin gas layer lived. The moon was making its own weather. This goes against everything scientists believed about dead worlds. A dead world has no air, no wind, and no weather. It is supposed to just sit there frozen in time. Scientists expected the moon to have no atmosphere at all. What they actually found was a ghostly layer of gas acting like a cage for floating rocks. This gap matters, because it means the moon is more alive than we ever thought. Here is where the story gets even weirder. The dust ring is not made of normal dirt. The Lunar Prospector data showed that the dust is highly charged with static electricity. Static electricity is the same invisible force that makes your hair stand up when you rub a balloon on your head. It makes tiny things stick together. The moon is basically covered in giant invisible balloons of static dust. How did you guess the origin of the floating ring before this reveal? Or did you expect normal dirt instead of an electric storm? Tell us your best guess in the comments below and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an update on this ongoing mystery. This static electricity comes from the sun. When sunlight hits the moon, it knocks tiny pieces of energy out of the moon dust. This gives the dust a powerful electrical charge. Because the dust particles all have the same charge, they push each other away. They refuse to stick to the ground. Instead, they float up into the sky like magic. Scientists expected gravity to keep the dust pinned to the ground. What they actually found was that static electricity was stronger than gravity. This gap matters because it shows the universe is full of hidden forces we cannot see. But even with static electricity, the ring should still eventually fade away. The electrical charge would drain, and the dust would slowly fall back down. The ring should have disappeared within a few months. Yet the ring is still there. The Lunar Prospector saw it, and later missions saw it too. The dust is constantly being replaced, and it is constantly holding its shape like a perfect circle. This means something is feeding the ring. There must be a giant source of dust hiding somewhere. But no one can see it, and no one knows where it is. Some scientists think the dust comes from deep cracks in the moon. These cracks might slowly leak gas and dust from deep underground. If the moon is hollow or has giant caves, it could be breathing dust out into space. Other scientists think the dust comes from comets. Comets are giant, dirty snowballs that fly through space. When they pass near the moon, they might leave a trail of dust that gets trapped by the static charge. Scientists expected the ring to be a temporary event that fades away. What they actually found was a permanent structure that keeps refreshing itself. This gap matters because it means there is an active engine inside or near the moon. This brings us to a very dark and interesting theory. Some experts believe NASA knows exactly where the dust is coming from. They believe the dust is a sign of something much larger happening on the dark side of the moon. The moon is tidally locked to Earth. That means the same side of the moon always faces us. We call this the near side. But there's another side of the moon we never see from Earth, and we call this the far side, or the dark side. It is a place we knew almost nothing about until recently. When spacecraft finally flew around to the far side, they found something shocking. The far side looks completely different from the near side. It has almost none of the flat, dark seas that we see from Earth. Instead, the far side is covered in thousands of giant craters. It looks like it was hit by a massive hammer millions of times. This huge difference between the two sides has puzzled scientists for decades. Scientists expected both sides of the moon to look the same. What they actually found was a completely different world on the far side. This gap matters because it proves the moon has a violent and strange history we do not fully understand. Some researchers think the far side is the key to the dust ring. They think the far side is being hit by something invisible right now. Every time it gets hit, dust flies up and gets trapped in the ring. What could be hitting the far side of the moon? The answer is the sun, but not in the way you might think. The sun creates a solar wind, but it also creates something much more dangerous. The sun throws out giant clouds of plasma. Plasma is a super hot soup of broken atoms that moves incredibly fast. When a plasma cloud hits a planet, it can cause huge problems. These plasma clouds are called coronal mass ejections. That is a complicated name for a giant magnetic storm from the sun. When these storms hit Earth, they cause the northern lights. But when these storms hit the moon, there is no air to protect it. The hot plasma slams directly into the surface. It hits the ground with so much force that it blasts dust up into the sky. Scientists expected the moon to be safe from space weather. What they actually found was that the moon is constantly being sandblasted by the sun. This gap matters because it changes how we think about living on the moon. This sandblasting effect could be the engine that feeds the dust ring. The sun blasts dust off the surface and the static electricity traps it in space. It is a beautiful but deadly cycle, but NASA has found something even deeper in their secret data. The dust ring is not just a circle of dirt. It is an electric machine. The dust particles in the ring are moving. They are not just floating still, they are spinning around the moon at incredible speeds. The particles are moving so fast that they create an electric current. This current surrounds the moon like an invisible wire. The moon is generating its own magnetic field. This is huge news. For a long time, scientists thought the moon had no magnetic field at all. Earth has a strong magnetic field that protects us from dangerous space radiation. The moon was supposed to have nothing. Scientists expected the moon to be totally unprotected from space radiation. What they actually found was a weak but real magnetic shield made of flying dust. This gap matters because it could change how we build bases on the moon. But this magnetic shield is strange. It is not coming from the center of the moon like Earth's shield does. It is coming from the ring itself. This means the ring is not just a bunch of dirt. It is an active part of the moon system. It is a living, breathing machine that protects the moon. And NASA has noticed that this ring is changing. It is not staying the same size all the time. It grows and shrinks depending on what the sun is doing. When the sun is very active, the ring gets bigger and thicker. When the sun is quiet, the ring shrinks down. It acts like a giant sponge reacting to the weather in space. Scientists expected the moon to be a boring, dead rock that never changes. What they actually found was a dynamic world that reacts to the sun every single day. This gap matters because it means the moon is deeply connected to the sun in ways we never knew. This is where the story shifts from history to right now. The moon is still wearing its impossible ring today, and we are finally going back to study it. NASA has a new program called Artemis. The goal of Artemis is to send humans back to the moon for the first time in over 50 years. They want to build a permanent base there, but the dust ring is a massive problem for the Artemis program. When astronauts fly through the ring, the dust will hit their spacecraft. The dust is moving incredibly fast, so it acts like tiny bullets. A single piece of dust moving at high speed can punch a hole in a spaceship. If the spaceship gets hit too many times, it could leak air and put the astronauts in danger. NASA has to figure out how to fly through the ring safely. Scientists expected going back to the moon would be easy since we already did it 50 years ago. What they actually found was that the dust ring makes the journey much more dangerous today. This gap matters because the safety of future astronauts depends on understanding this dust. The dust is also a problem for the spacesuits. When astronauts walk on the moon, the dust sticks to them. Remember how the Apollo astronauts said the dust smelled like burnt gunpowder? The static electricity in the dust makes it stick to everything like a magnet. It gets into the joints of the spacesuits and breaks them. It scratches the glass on their helmets so they cannot see. If we are going to live on the moon, we have to beat the dust. The dust ring is a warning sign. It tells us that the moon is a hostile place that does not want us there. Scientists expected the moon to be a simple place to build a base. What they actually found was a world covered in sharp electric dust that fights back. This gap matters because it could ruin our plans to live in space. Right now, scientists are working hard to solve this problem. They are trying to invent new materials that dust cannot stick to. They are trying to build giant electromagnetic shields for spaceships, but the dust ring still holds its deepest secret. We know it is there, and we know it is dangerous, but we still do not know exactly how big it is. Recent probes have found that the ring extends much further into space than we thought. It might even reach all the way to Earth. The moon might be sharing its dust with us. Tiny pieces of moon dust might be slowly floating through space and landing on Earth right now. We might be breathing in pieces of the moon every day without knowing it. This dust could be raining down on our heads at this very moment. Scientists expected the moon to keep its dust to itself. What they actually found was a giant bridge of dust connecting the Earth and the moon. This gap matters because it means the moon and Earth are physically linked. This changes how we think about the moon. It is not just a distant rock floating in the sky. It is a living part of our world, breathing dust into our atmosphere. The impossible ring is a symbol of how little we know about space. We think we understand the moon because we have looked at it for so long, but the universe is always hiding surprises. The moon is not dead. It is moving, breathing, and changing every day. It reacts to the sun, it traps dust, and it protects itself with a magnetic shield. What else is hiding up there? If the moon can keep a secret like a giant dust ring for this long, imagine what else we have missed. The universe is full of mysteries waiting to be found. Scientists expected space exploration to be boring and predictable. What they actually found was a universe full of impossible rings, electric dust, and hidden forces. This gap matters because it reminds us to never stop asking questions. We are standing on the edge of a new age of discovery. The Artemis missions will go back to the moon to face this dust head-on. They will fly through the ring and study it up close. When the next human walks on the moon, they will see the dust floating in the sky. They will feel the static electricity pulling at their suits. They will know that the moon is alive. The secret data NASA collected on the moon ring has changed everything. It proved that a dead rock can have weather, rings, and magnetic fields. It proved that the universe is much stranger than we thought. The moon is calling to us. It is wearing a glowing halo of electric dust, daring us to come back and solve its mystery. The impossible ring is waiting. If you were the one stepping onto the moon and seeing this glowing ring with your own eyes, what do you think your very first thought would be? Tell us your answer in the comments, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you are the first to know when we uncover the next piece of this puzzle, and share this video with someone who looks up at the night sky and wonders what else is hiding in the dark. Thank you for watching.